If someone had to design from scratch a creature to represent intelligent life on another planet, they would hardly improve upon the octopus. At first glance, it looks like a biological experiment taken too far. A soft body without a rigid skeleton, 8 arms covered in mobile suckers, 3 hearts beating at different rhythms, blue blood circulating through veins and arteries. All of this seems more fitting for science fiction than for a related animal. Ultimately, they are related to snails and clams. And yet, that's what they are. Mollusks, animals that share a common ancestor with bivalves and gastropods, but followed such an extreme evolutionary branch that it's almost difficult to recognize their common origin. Blue blood is one of the first oddities that catches the eye. Instead of iron-based hemoglobin, like mammals and most vertebrates, octopuses use hemocyanin, a copper-based protein, to transport oxygen. At a chemical level, the molecule works best at low temperatures and in oxygen-poor waters. That is, it is optimized for many deep-sea or cold marine habitats where dissolved oxygen is scarce. When hemocyanin is oxygenated, the blood takes on a dark blue hue. When it loses oxygen, it becomes paler, almost colorless. This color change is not merely decorative. It reflects the animal's functional state and reinforces the feeling of being in the presence of an alternative biology on the same planet. Then there are the 3 hearts. One is the systemic heart, responsible for pumping blood to the rest of the body. The other 2 are branchial hearts located near the gills. Their function is to propel blood across the respiratory surfaces to oxygenate it before sending it to the systemic circulation. This distributed design has direct consequences for their way of life. When the octopus actively swims using a water jet, the systemic heart momentarily stops. The result is that this type of swimming is physiologically costly. It tires them quickly. That's why, in practice, they mostly prefer to glide along the bottom, walk with their arms, or move with short bursts of propulsion, rather than swim long distances like a fish. The unusual nature continues in the nervous system. A common octopus has around 500 million neurons, a number comparable to that of some small mammals and far greater than that of almost all other invertebrates. But what is truly remarkable is not the number but their distribution. Only a fraction is concentrated in the central brain, inside the head. Approximately 70% of the neurons are located in the arms, organized into networks of local ganglia. Each arm can process sensory information, make motor decisions, and coordinate movements with a high degree of autonomy. That's why it's often said, in simplified terms, that the octopus has 9 brains, 1 central brain, and 8 peripheral ones in its arms. This isn't just an empty slogan. In experiments, each limb can explore, feel, taste, and manipulate objects almost as if it were a semi-independent entity. If an isolated arm is stimulated, it can execute complex movement patterns without needing detailed commands from the brain. The suckers not only adhere with great force, they also possess chemical receptors that detect substances dissolved in the water. The result is that the octopus literally tastes everything it touches. Its sense of touch is also its sense of taste. This distribution of intelligence throughout the body is unlike anything we know in vertebrates. In our case, most processing occurs in the brain within the skull. In the octopus, processing is distributed between the center and a constellation of peripheral nodes. The body becomes part of the nervous system in a much more direct way. Something similar occurs with its physical organization. Lacking an internal skeleton and an external shell, the octopus is, for all practical purposes, a flexible muscular structure capable of assuming almost any shape. Each arm is formed by muscles arranged in different directions, allowing it to bend, shorten, thicken, or twist without a fixed, bony axis. Thanks to this architecture, it can stretch like a rope, flatten itself against the bottom, inflate to appear larger, or compress itself to squeeze through a tiny crack. Under the right conditions, an adult octopus can pass through an opening barely larger than its eye, which is the most rigid part of its body. This bodily plasticity gives it access to refuges inaccessible to larger, more rigid predators. It allows it to hide inside bottles, among narrow rocks and under stacks of shells, and at the same time it offers a vast repertoire of postures for camouflage, allowing it to pass itself off as algae, rocks, or even other venomous animals. Despite this apparent fragility, octopuses manipulate their environment with great precision. Their arms can coordinate complex movements without the need for detailed instructions from the central brain. They can open shells, dismantle clasps, roll up objects, and move them. In the laboratory, it has been shown that they learn to open jars, remember how they did it, and can apply similar solutions to new problems. Solving mazes, choosing the correct exit after several attempts, avoiding areas where they have previously received unpleasant stimuli. All of this is within their capabilities. In aquariums, there are numerous anecdotal but consistent records. Octopuses that recognize specific keepers and react differently to different people. Individuals that squirt jets of water at lights or cameras that bother them as if trying to turn off or displace whatever is causing them discomfort. Specimens that escape their tanks at night, slink into other tanks, feed on fish or crustaceans, and then return to their own aquarium before anyone can find them. This type of behavior suggests memory, exploration, and a certain degree of planning. All of this fuels the idea that we are facing an alternative intelligence, a nervous system that reached complexity through a different path than mammals. While our brain is clearly centralized within the skull, the octopus distributes much of its processing throughout its arms. While our anatomy is rigid, with defined bones and joints, the octopus is a fluid mass that can reorganize itself on the fly. While we rely heavily on vision as our dominant sense, octopuses combine good eyesight with extremely fine chemical touch in each sucker and a remarkable ability to change the color pattern and texture of their skin. From an evolutionary perspective, however, none of this appeared out of nowhere. Cephalopods emerged in the fossil record more than 400 million years ago. Their ancestors were shelled animals similar to modern nautiluses. That shell provided protection and support, but it also limited their flexibility. Over millions of years, different branches reduced, internalized, or lost that shell. In doing so, they freed their bodies to acquire new forms of movement, buoyancy, and manipulation. Squid and cuttlefish followed an intermediate path. Octopuses took the process almost to the extreme, completely abandoning the external shell. Like octopuses, this morphological freedom was combined with the development of an increasingly complex nervous system. Living in three-dimensional environments such as reefs, rocky bottoms, and underwater caves demands the ability to plan routes, remember hiding places, and constantly assess risks. Hunting active prey, dodging faster predators, and using any available space as a refuge placed strong selective pressure on perception and motor control. The evolutionary solution was to distribute intelligence throughout the body, turning each arm into an autonomous explorer and endowing the whole with a physical and cognitive flexibility that is difficult to match. The result is one of the clearest examples of how evolution can build a complex mind along a radically different path than our own. The octopus's skin is one of the most sophisticated camouflage systems in the animal kingdom. It doesn't just change color, it also alters patterns, brightness, and even texture, and it does so in fractions of a second. To understand why many biologists refer to it as a living screen connected to the nervous system, we need to take a close look at how this seemingly smooth surface is constructed. In the top layer of the skin are chromatophores, tiny sacs of pigment surrounded by radial muscles. Each chromatophore contains primarily shades of yellow, orange, red, or brown. At rest, the sac is contracted and almost invisible. When the muscles are activated, the sac stretches and the pigment unfolds like a dot of ink being magnified. Thousands of chromatophores, expanding or contracting simultaneously, create spots, bands, or patches that cover the entire body. Beneath the chromatophores are other specialized cells, iridophores and leucophores. Iridophores reflect light structurally, producing metallic, green or bluish shimmers depending on the angle of incidence. Leucophores, on the other hand, act as a white base that scatters light and onto which the rest of the pattern is printed. The combination of pigments and reflectors allows the octopus to reproduce with remarkable precision the tones of its surroundings: light sands, dark rocks, green algae, reddish corals. What's remarkable is the speed of these changes. Timed studies show that some octopuses take around 0.2 seconds to switch from one pattern to another, less time than a human blink. This interval includes the perception of the visual stimulus, the response decision, and the coordinated activation of thousands of cells in the skin. It's not a simple local reflex, it's a global adjustment of the entire body. The octopus's visual repertoire is organized into camouflage templates. Many individuals can alternate between a few basic patterns: fine modeling for sandy bottoms, large patches for rocks, and contrasting stripes for bottoms with sharp shadows. Each pattern combines color distribution and texture. When the animal lands on a rough bottom, it not only adjusts its tone, but also raises its cutaneous papillae, tiny muscular structures that protrude from the skin, giving it a granular appearance like coral or porous stone. On smooth bottoms, however, it retracts these papillae and becomes smooth and flat. It is even more striking that octopuses are, as far as we know, dichromats with a very similar type of photoreceptor, lacking the diversity of colored cones found in many vertebrates. This has led to theories that they do not see color as we do, but rather use other mechanisms such as sensitivity to wavelength through chromatic aberrations of the pupil to infer the spectrum of their surroundings. Whatever the exact mechanism, the fact remains that they achieve a remarkable color match with the background, despite this apparent ocular limitation. In addition to passive camouflage, octopuses use their ability to change their appearance to communicate and deceive. In the presence of predators, some adopt warning patterns with stark contrasts to appear less edible or more dangerous. Others use their bodies as mimicry. Species like the so-called mime octopus can adopt postures and colors reminiscent of lionfish, sea snakes, or poisonous flounders, depending on the perceived threat. They don't just change color, they rearrange their silhouette, distribute their arms, and modify the shape of their mantle. In social interactions, although octopuses are not highly gregarious animals, they also display body language. Abrupt changes to dark tones can indicate aggression or defense. Pulsating patterns of color across the body seem to correlate with states of excitement or stress. In mating contexts, some males exhibit specific patterns as they approach the female, alternating between total camouflage and patches of color visible only from certain angles. All of this implies a very close integration between vision, neural processing, and muscular control of the skin. Information from the environment reaches the eyes. The central nervous system interprets it. The commands are distributed to networks of neurons that control chromatophores, iridophores, leucophores, and papillae. But it doesn't end there. There are indications that certain responses can be modulated locally, so that parts of the body adjust their pattern without an explicit command to each cell from the main brain. The octopus's skin, in practice, behaves as a dynamic extension of its nervous system. It's not just a covering. It's both a sensory and motor organ, capable of reacting at a level of detail that surpasses what could be coordinated from a single control center. An observer sees the animal disappear against a rocky background and tends to think it's a visual trick. In reality, what occurs is a massive redistribution of muscular and nervous activity, modulated in real time by the perception of the environment. For a human brain accustomed to separating skin, eye, and brain as clearly differentiated structures, this integrated system is disconcerting. It contributes to the feeling that the octopus operates according to different rules, almost as if it were a bioengineered entity outside the patterns of vertebrates. But what appears to be strange design is, once again, the result of millions of years of natural selection in complex, three-dimensional environments where camouflage is the difference between living and being devoured. To understand why octopuses are described as having distributed intelligence, we must start with the basics. Their nervous system has approximately 500 million neurons, but only a portion of these are concentrated in the central brain. The rest are distributed throughout the body, with a particularly high density in the arms. Each of the 8 arms contains networks of ganglia that process sensory information, coordinate complex movements, and can execute actions without the detailed supervision of the main brain. This is why the idea that the octopus has 9 brains became popular: a central one located around the esophagus and a functional one in each arm. These are not independent brains in the human sense, but rather local control centers capable of making limited decisions. The central brain establishes general objectives, such as exploring, capturing, and approaching prey, while the arms handle the details: which trajectory to follow, how much force to apply, which suckers to use, and how to coordinate with each other. Neurophysiological experiments show that an isolated arm can still respond to tactile stimuli in an organized way. It contracts, grasps, and explores. These are not random movements, but rather motor patterns pre-configured within the arm's neural tissue. In the whole animal, these modules are integrated under the supervision of the central brain, but retain a degree of autonomy. Environmental exploration aptly illustrates this logic. When an octopus approaches an unfamiliar surface, it doesn't extend a single arm, obeying a precise command from the brain with every millimeter traveled. It typically deploys several limbs that simultaneously feel, test, and manipulate. The suckers gather mechanical and chemical information, texture, shape, the presence of edible or toxic substances. Part of this processing is resolved within the arm itself, which decides whether to continue advancing, go around an obstacle, or retreat. The central brain receives a summary of what is happening, not the details of every contact. This organization is more reminiscent of a distributed network than a rigid hierarchy. Instead of a director controlling every muscle, there are local nodes with some decision-making capacity connected to a central node that sets goals and resolves conflicts. If 2 arms want to grasp the same object, the brain coordinates. But if an arm detects something dangerous, it can move away before consulting with anyone. This local speed is an obvious advantage in an environment teeming with predators. Learning is also affected by this architecture. Octopuses are capable of acquiring new behaviors through trial and error, opening jars, sliding lids, and operating latches. At a neuronal level, this means that distributed motor patterns are adjusted based on the reward received. The central brain can reinforce certain movement sequences and suppress others, while the circuits in the arms fine-tune the manipulation. This type of learning is not limited to a single location. It is distributed between the body's core and periphery. Another consequence is the ability to multitask. An octopus can use some arms to anchor its body in a crevice, others to explore an object, and yet another to bring food to its mouth, all in a coordinated manner. From the outside, it looks like a chaotic tangle of tentacles. In reality, each arm follows specific programs and exchanges enough information to avoid entanglements and collisions. Absolute centralization would make this control too slow. Decentralization allows for parallel and rapid responses. Even arm regeneration fits this model. When an octopus loses a limb, it is eventually able to regenerate it with all its functional complexity, including the neural network of the new arm. It doesn't just rebuild muscle and skin, it reconstructs a complete cognitive module ready to integrate into the overall network. That an animal can rebuild part of its own peripheral neural infrastructure and reinsert it into the functional system sounds, again, like engineering design, rather than simple healing. This distributed perspective challenges our intuitions about what it means to think. In humans, thought is almost always associated with the interior of the skull. In the octopus, a significant part of what we would call calculation occurs within the body itself. Its arms are not simply tools controlled by a central operator. They actively participate in motor and sensory decision-making. It is reasonable to say that the octopus thinks with its arms, in the sense that they evaluate, select, and execute actions semi-independently. From the perspective of cognitive science, this makes it a perfect model for studying the idea of embodied mind, the notion that cognition is not localized in a single organ, but rather emerges from the continuous interaction between brain, body, and environment. In the octopus, this interaction is so extreme that our usual distinction between central nervous system and periphery becomes blurred. All of this has developed without anything resembling a spine, skeleton, or articulated hand. Evolution has explored a completely different path to solve similar problems. How to perceive the environment, how to manipulate it, how to anticipate consequences. While vertebrates opted for centralization and rigid structures, this mollusk chose a flexible, body-expanding network. For a long time, it was thought that sophisticated tool use was almost exclusively the domain of primates, some marine mammals, and a few birds. That an invertebrate could do something similar seemed improbable. That idea was challenged in 2009 when a team of researchers in Indonesia documented a small octopus collecting, transporting, and assembling coconut halves to use as a portable shelter. The animal in question was Amphiooctopus marginatus, now popularly known as the coconut octopus. The observed behavior had several well-defined steps. First, the animal located empty coconut halves on the seabed, remnants of fruit discarded by humans and washed ashore on sandy bottoms. Then it positioned itself on one of the halves, cleaned it of sediment with jets of water, and rotated it until it was in the correct orientation. Sometimes it would look for a second compatible half and bring it closer. Finally, it would gather one or two shells under its body and begin to move along the seabed as if walking on stilts. Arms extended downwards, shells held by suckers, body suspended above. While moving in this way, the octopus is more exposed than if it were to stick to the substrate or scurry into a crevice. The researchers interpreted this as an investment. The animal accepts an immediate risk in exchange for a future benefit, having a portable shelter when needed. The key to considering this tool use lies not only in the fact that it hides inside something, but also in the fact that it collects, transports, and stores these materials for later use, outside the context in which they were found. This distinction is important. Many animals use objects from their environment immediately. A fish entering a crevice, a hermit crab occupying an available shell. The coconut octopus goes further. It moves coconut halves tens of meters along the seabed before using them, assembling them to form an almost closed sphere around its body. Subsequent observations showed that it can also utilize mollusk shells and other human debris, incorporating them into the same repertoire of mobile shelters. In cognitive terms, this behavior involves several interconnected abilities. First, recognition of the shape and properties of objects. The octopus identifies that these coconut halves are hollow, sturdy, and fit together. Second, motor planning. It coordinates 8 arms and hundreds of suckers to position, hold, and transport pieces that are larger than itself. Third, temporal foresight. It tolerates an immediate cost to obtain a deferred benefit, something that in other species is usually associated with a degree of future-oriented thinking. The story of the coconut octopus is not an isolated case of exotic oddity within a simple group. Other octopuses have been observed accumulating stones and shells to reinforce the entrances to their burrows, arranging them as defensive walls. In captivity, individuals of different species learn to open jars, move sliding lids, operate levers, or direct jets of water toward light switches or equipment that bothers them. In all these scenarios, they combine the tactile and chemical exploration of their suckers with the ability to remember which actions produce which effects. From an evolutionary perspective, these behaviors have deep roots. Cephalopods are active predators that hunt shrimp, crabs and fish in complex, three-dimensional environments such as rocky bottoms and reefs. They cannot rely on a rigid shell like many other mollusks. Their defense is to move quickly, hide, and manipulate their surroundings. This selective pressure favors nervous systems capable of integrating visual, tactile, and chemical information, and extremely flexible bodies that can take advantage of makeshift shelters and tiny gaps. The evolution of a smart, soft body also drives unconventional motor control solutions. Coordinating 8 arms with countless degrees of freedom is very different from moving 4 articulated limbs. Models suggest that, in these animals, many control tasks are resolved locally in the arms, while the central brain handles general goals and integrates contextual information. Within this framework, tool use doesn't appear as a magical leap, but rather as a natural extension of pre-existing capabilities. Fine tactile exploration, object memory, trial and error learning, and the planning of complex movements. The difference with other invertebrates is one of degree, not of the presence or absence of intelligence. What is surprising is the extent to which this degree approximates behaviors we previously considered typically mammalian or even human. The accumulation of evidence has led to a redefinition of the boundary between cognitively advanced vertebrates and the rest of the animal kingdom. The octopus occupies an awkward place in that classification. Its lineage diverged from ours hundreds of millions of years ago, and yet it has arrived at functional solutions comparable to those of animals with much larger brains and entirely different bodies. It is a clear example of convergent evolution in terms of function, but divergent in terms of structure. This functional convergence fuels the idea of alien intelligence, not because there is real proof that octopuses come from another planet, but because their biology shows how. Starting from very different materials and a radically different body architecture, natural selection can produce systems with astonishing learning, manipulation, and anticipation capabilities. To imagine an extraterrestrial mind, many scientists prefer to first study terrestrial minds that already deviate from the known, and the octopuses is the best available candidate. Although most octopuses are solitary hunters, in recent years, scenes have been documented that seem straight out of a science fiction film. Mixed groups of fish and octopuses organizing joint hunts on reefs and rocky bottoms. In the waters of the Red Sea and other tropical areas, divers and biologists have recorded daytime octopuses patrolling alongside various predatory fish, such as groupers, croakers, and goatfish, in veritable interspecies hunting teams. The basic functioning of these alliances relies on complementarity. Fish have the advantage in rapid pursuit across open water and in exploring the water column. The octopus, on the other hand, dominates the reef's nooks and crannies, substrate holes and crevices where prey take refuge. During the recorded hunts, the fish often act as scouts. They scan the surroundings, detect suspicious movements, and visually mark a point on the seabed by changing direction or adopting characteristic postures. The octopus responds to these signals by approaching the indicated place and using its arms to explore cavities and expel hidden prey. When prey attempts to escape into the open water, the fish are well positioned to intercept it. If, on the other hand, it remains hidden, the octopus can insert its arms into the crevice, feel the interior with its suckers, and capture it directly. In this way, both types of predators increase their chances of success compared to what they would achieve alone. Cooperation is neither constant nor obligatory. It forms and dissolves depending on prey density, habitat structure, and the availability of suitable partners, suggesting flexible behavior rather than a rigid program. A striking aspect is the assignment of roles within these associations. Some studies have observed that certain fish species tend to occupy relatively stable positions. Some go ahead to explore, others stay close to the octopus, waiting for an opportunity to capture fleeing prey, and still others patrol the periphery of the group. The octopus, for its part, seems to act as a catalyst for action when it decides to descend to the bottom and extend its arms over a specific area. This functional structure is reminiscent of cooperative hunts among social vertebrates, but here it occurs between species that, in principle, do not have lasting social bonds. Cooperation does not eliminate conflict. In fact, one of the findings that has most captured public attention is the observation of octopuses punching their fish partners during these hunts. In video recordings analyzed by ethologists, episodes are described in which an octopus explosively launches an arm at a specific fish, displacing it from the group or removing it from the area where it could obtain prey. These punches are not random. They are usually directed at fish that have tried to steal a catch or that have positioned themselves advantageously without contributing to the hunt. Researchers interpret these strikes as a form of partner control, a mechanism by which the octopus penalizes opportunistic companions, redistributes access to the benefits of the hunt, and, in some cases, breaks off cooperation with unreliable individuals. Something similar has been described in social vertebrates that punish uncooperative group members. Here, however, we are dealing with interactions between different species, coordinated in real time, without complex social structures or stable hierarchies. This type of cooperative hunting raises several cognitive questions. To truly benefit from the alliance, the octopus must recognize its potential partners, distinguish between fish that contribute something and fish that are only trying to take advantage, and adjust its behavior accordingly. It must integrate rapid visual cues such as changes in direction, head movements, and movement patterns with its own search schema. Furthermore, it needs a degree of short-term memory to associate an individual's actions with specific outcomes, at least for the duration of the hunt. At the level of the nervous system, the octopus's distributed architecture could facilitate this coordination. While the central brain assesses the group's disposition and decides when to dive to the bottom, extend its arms, or change areas, the ganglia in the arms manage the finer details: which crevice to explore, how to circle around a rock, how to adjust its skin pattern to remain relatively camouflaged while stalking. This integrated multitasking allows it to respond simultaneously to signals from fish, prey, and the physical environment, something that would be poorly suited to a completely centralized control system. What is remarkable is that all this complexity occurs in a lineage that lacks the classic characteristics associated with persistent sociability. There are no herds, no stable schools, and no lasting family groups. Most of the octopus's life cycle is spent alone, with brief encounters for reproduction. Even so, in certain ecological contexts, it is capable of entering cooperative modes, implicitly negotiating with other species, and managing occasional conflicts within these temporary alliances. It is this set of traits that has led many popularizers to describe the octopus as the closest thing to an alien on Earth. Some fringe hypotheses have gone further, suggesting that certain peculiarities of its genes or nervous system would support directed panspermia, that is, an extraterrestrial origin for part of its biology. However, the available evidence does not support this idea. The octopus genome, although complex and full of surprising expansions of gene families, fits within what is expected in mollusk evolution and shows continuity with other cephalopods. The scientific consensus is clear: octopuses are a product of terrestrial evolution, not of cosmic seeding. What makes them fascinating is not that they come from another planet, but that, starting from a very ancient common ancestor with other mollusks, their lineage has explored an extreme combination of body plasticity, sensory sophistication, and distributed nervous organization. When we observe them disappearing in 0.2 seconds against a rocky bottom, walking as if on stilts carrying coconuts, or coordinating attacks and ambushes alongside fish, what we see is not a visitor from space, but a demonstration of how far the diversity of life on a single planet can go when allowed to develop for hundreds of millions of years.